Vasanti?
She's right there.
Oh, no one has turned the air conditioner on?
Oh,
So it's getting quite warm in here.
okay.
So the air conditioner should be turned on. I guess it hasn't come up. It will. Okay. Good. Om Sada Shiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Very good. Be seated, please. Okay, I'll try this. Good. Okay. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karava Vahayi Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha vahayi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Nice to see you all. Welcome. And push the right button. There we go. Welcome also to our many viewers taking these classes online. We'll continue our study, this very wonderful section. As we come towards the end of the entire Bhagavad Gita, we come to the second part of chapter 18, which is a lot of very powerful summary we're in the midst of right now. And we'll begin with some recitation, starting with verse 53. And as always, as I'm reciting, read the translation. I'm pointing out the obvious, that this translation is a little unique. By the way, little unique is a contradiction of terms, right? Okay. This translation is unique in that it goes quarter by quarter, and the English follows the meaning of each quarter. So that'll make it meaningful then when you read and then repeat. All right, let us begin. Ahankaram. Let me just make sure this is working. This has all been changed, so I want to make sure it works. Okay. Ahankaram balam dharpam, ahankaram balam dharpam, kamam krodham parigraham, kamam krodham parigraham, vimuchya nirmama shanto, vimuchya nirmama shanto. Brahma bhuyaya kalpate, Brahma bhuyaya kalpate, Brahma bhuta prasannatma, Brahma bhuta prasannatma, na shochati na kankshati, na shochati na kankshati, samah sarveshu bhuteshu, samah sarveshu bhuteshu, madbhaktim labhate param, madbhaktim labhate param. Bhaktya mama vijanati, bhaktya mama vijanati, yavan yaschasmi tattvataha, yavan yaschasmi tattvataha, tato mam tattvato jnatva, tato mam tattvato jnatva, vishate taranantaram, Vishate taranantaram, sarva karman yapi sada, sarva karman yapi kurvano madvyapashrayaha, kurvano madvyapashrayaha, mat prasaradavapnoti, mat prasaradavapnoti, shashvatam paramavyayam, shashvatam paramavyayam, chetasa sarvakarmani, chetasa sarvakarmani, Mayi sanyasya matparaha, Mayi sanyasya matparaha, Buddhi yogamupashritya, Buddhi yogamupashritya, Matchitta satatam bhava, Matchitta satatam Matchitta sarva durgani, Matchitta sarva durgani, Matprasadattarishyasi, Matprasadattarishyasi, Ata chettvamahankaran, Ata chettvamahankaran, Nashroshasi na vinangshasi, Nashroshasi vinangshasi. Uh-oh. We'll see that next time. Arjuna's getting into some trouble here. Anyway, we'll see that only in our next class. Now we continue here. I want to return. We had, in our prior class, we had seen verse 53. The end of verse 53 included a statement which was maybe surprising, maybe not. And he is talking, the prior three verses, if you remember, talked about sadhana, spiritual practice, which is meant to gradually lead you on a process of spiritual growth, which ultimately culminates in enlightenment. And he says the result of that process of spiritual growth, as a result of that process of spiritual growth, the last line of verse 53, Brahma bhuyaya kalpate. You become kalpate, you become fit, you become able. Brahma bhuyaya, to be Brahman. And I've translated it here many times, translated as merge with Brahman. You become prepared to become, very literally, you become prepared, kalpate, Brahma bhuyaya, to become Brahman. And that's a very literal translation. What does it mean to become Brahman? We spoke about this briefly at the end of the last class, but I want to come back to it because it's a common misunderstanding in spiritual life in general and Vedanta in particular, that you become something more than you are now. That's a very common notion of enlightenment, right? You become something more than you are now. That's a very commonly accepted notion, and it's absolutely wrong. Why is it absolutely wrong? We've discussed this many times, and you heard many times. Your true nature is divine. You've heard that. Did anyone say your true nature will become divine? Have you ever heard that? No. You've only heard your true nature is divine. Of course, that's based on the Mahavakya, Tattvam Asi. You are that. It doesn't say you will become that, as we've observed many times before. You already, my guru's words are nicer, you already are that which you want to become. You already possess that which you want to gain. Very important. What we call enlightenment is not, language is so funny. As a teacher, I guess I've come to appreciate the mysteries of language. To say attain enlightenment sounds like you're gaining something you don't have. But there's a trick I don't know if I should call it a trick. It is a trick. The trick is, it's not through gaining anything that you become enlightened. It's through getting rid of something that you become enlightened. You've heard here before that the problem, you are already divine, you are already Brahman, Tattvamasi, you are already that, but that reality is perhaps unknown to you. It's hidden under a so-called veil of ignorance, and that ignorance needs to be removed. When you remove the so-called veil of ignorance, is there anything else that needs to be done? Is it like step 1, remove the veil of ignorance? Step 2, become enlightened. You see the problem with that? Removing the veil of ignorance is enlightenment. There's no step 2. Therefore, enlightenment is simply the removal of ignorance. It is not transformation into some kind of greater glory, as many people feel. The fact is that your true nature is already glorious, already wonderful, already blessed, already divine. The problem, of course, is that veil of ignorance. We want to rip away that veil of ignorance. That's enlightenment. That's what Sri Krishna is referring to. I have a note here. A little bit of technical Vedanta, and the expression tat tvam asi reveals that the reality because of which you exist is the same as the reality because of which the world exists, is the same because of which Ishvara exists. One reality gives existence to countless living beings. The same one reality gives existence to the entire world. The same one reality gives existence to Ishvara. That one reality in these three forms is your true nature. That is Brahman, and that is to be discovered. Okay, so that is to complete verse 53 before we continue. Brahma bhuta prasannatma, Brahma bhuta prasannatma, na shochati na kankshati, na shochati na kankshati, sama sarveshu bhuteshu, sama sarveshu bhuteshu, madbhaktim labhate param, madbhaktim labhate param. Brahma bhutaha literally means one who has become Brahman, and by now you've figured out that sense of becoming is figurative. Language, we have to be ready for that. So, by the way, how many people get in trouble because they misinterpret Scripture? Our Christian friends misinterpret Scripture. Our Muslim friends misinterpret Scripture. And sadly, many of our Hindu friends also misinterpret Scripture, which is why we have these classes. It's not easy to arrive at the correct meaning, which is why we've always taken the help of gurus, spiritual teachers. So it's just a practical, sorry for the aside, so many people ask, is it really necessary to have a guru? And it's kind of a misdirected question. Tell me, if you wanted to study something very complicated, the example I've given before, if you want to study differential calculus, don't ask me why you want to study. I studied it when I was young and it was a nuisance. Anyway, if you want if you want to study differential calculus, wouldn't it just be common sense to have a teacher? Theoretically, you could learn it on your own. Theoretically, you could learn it without a teacher. Sir Isaac Newton learned it, didn't have a teacher. He invented it. So if Newton didn't need a teacher and he understood differential calculus, would you say then, why do I need a teacher? Newton couldn't do it. You get the point? If you are as great of a genius as Newton, then I agree, you don't need a teacher. It's common sense. Anyway, enough said. That's a question. Do I really need a teacher? And it's just common sense. Okay. So with the help of a teacher and with the help of commentaries we'll talk about in just a few minutes, we come to understand Brahma Bhuta is figurative. It's not that you become Brahman, except in one very limited sense. One who has shifted his or her identification from this body-mind to the true self. Generally, we identify ourselves in terms of our bodies, minds, and more specifically, our activities. Oftentimes when you meet someone at a social event, you introduce by telling them your profession. Of course, the fact is your profession has very little to, not very little. Your profession is not the most important thing of who you are, but that's a common thing. Hello, my name is so-and-so. I am a doctor. I am an engineer. I am doing whatever it is. But those terms refer to your self-identification. In, let me see that. Actually, we'll see that later. In Sanskrit, we use the term ahankara in several senses. We used it in the prior verse to refer to pride, which is a very common meaning of ahankara in the sense of pride. But we also use ahankara in a more technical sense as self-identity, your concept of who you are. That's just fascinating to consider. You have a concept of who you are, right? And that concept includes your age, your gender, your weight, your hair color. You get the point. So part of that self-identity is in terms of our body. Much more of that self-identity has to do with your personality. I am kind, I am loving, I get angry sometimes, so that's also part of your self-identity. Your family is part of your self-identity. I am the son or daughter of these parents. I am the mother or father of these children, etc. That's all part of your identity. And that profession we mentioned before is one more part of your self-identity, your self-concept. We can use the word ahankara in a technical way to mean that self-concept. And generally, everyone has that same self-concept, except those who are enlightened. When you become enlightened, your self-concept shifts, because you know, I'm not this body and mind. You know that I'm not merely what I do and what I look like and the way my mind works. You recognize your body and mind and family as all being external to you. You recognize that my true nature is the inner divinity that technically is called Brahman. That inner divinity technically is Brahman. There is no other Brahman other than that so-called inner divinity. So an enlightened person is one who doesn't say, I am so-and-so, I am Swami Tadatmananda, I am male, I am overweight, whatever. That self-concept. An enlightened person is one who says, did something change here? No? Okay. I'm just concerned about the computer because a lot has been changed. Seems to be working okay? Okay, no problem. Sorry for the introduction. An enlightened person is one who doesn't say, I am Swami Tadatmananda. An enlightened person is one whose self-concept has changed to such a degree where the enlightened person can say, I am Brahman. That is the internal realization of the enlightened person. Now, does it mean that if I'm enlightened and I introduce myself, should I say, hello, I am Brahman? That's silly, right? Because if you're enlightened, you know that in common dialogue, it doesn't work to say, I am Brahman. So an enlightened person would say, I am Swami Tadatmananda, but internally. The internal realization is that I am Brahman. That self-concept has been totally transformed. You know, we've had this discussion, by the way, in our Vedanta class, our Sunday Vedanta class, where we've talked about an enlightened ego. We discussed this quite a bit in the Vedanta class. Let me share it with you here, because it's really important. Many people wrongly believe that the goal of spiritual life is to be free from your ego, destroy the ego. And it sounds very powerful, very impressive. Yes, I need to destroy the ego. Now, to get ego in a sense of pride, absolutely. But now we're talking about it in this technical sense. Ego in the sense of self-identity. Suppose somehow you destroyed your ego. And then I ask you, who are you? What would you reply? You'd have to say, I don't know. Right? Because you wouldn't have any self-concept at all. That self-concept is an organizational principle in our minds. It helps to structure our thinking and behavior. There is a self-concept. It's a very functional part of your mind. Ishvara put it there. Why do you want to destroy it? And further, it's helpful. It helps us interact. It helps us function. So let's be very clear. The goal of these teachings is not to destroy the ego, but rather to transform the ego. Again, ego is a translation for ahankara, but in this technical sense as self-concept. So our goal then is not to remove that self-concept, I am Swami Tadatmananda, etc. Our goal is to transform that self-concept to create what we call an enlightened ego. That's the goal. An enlightened ego is one whose internal realization is I am Brahman. They may not say that to you, but that's the internal perspective. We had that discussion at length in our Vedanta class. By the way, that Vedanta class is on hiatus now for the summer. It will resume in fall, and you might like to attend it. It starts with a new chapter and a new topic, and we'll talk about that when it resumes. So, Brahma Bhutaha is not one who has literally become Brahman, but one who has figuratively become Brahman, one whose self-concept has undergone transformation, one who identifies oneself as Brahman. And that would be a good translation. That person is obviously prasanna atma. Prasanna means calm. It has other meanings as well. Atma here, be careful. One whose Atma is calm. Does anyone have an Atma that's not calm? You get the point. Atma by nature is Satchidananda, always calm. So here the word Atma refers to mind. Sometimes Atma means mind. Occasionally it even means body. Sometimes it just means yourself in a general way. Again, this is why we need a teacher to understand these teachings properly. So one whose mind is calm, that person who has become enlightened, who identifies himself or herself with Brahman, that person obviously na shochati, na kankshati. That person doesn't shochati, doesn't grieve. By the way, remember the context of this discussion. Sri Krishna is teaching whom? Arjuna. Where? On a battlefield where Arjuna's family members are about to perish. So hear the message to Arjuna and to all of us. Na shochati. There's no reason to grieve if you have gained this wisdom. Na kankshati. There's nothing to be desired. Nothing missing from your life. A common definition of enlightenment is krita krityata, a state of complete and utter fulfillment. The metaphor I've used before is imagine having a to-do list for your entire life. And imagine in one stroke, everything is checked off. Krita krityata, utter fulfillment. Also, this enlightened person is samaha, the same, sarveshu bhuteshu, towards all beings. Once again, put it on in context, on the battlefield. There are the good guys, the Pandavas, and there are the bad guys, so to speak, the Kauravas. And here Sri Krishna says, when you're enlightened, you don't differentiate between the good guys and the bad guys. Apply that to your own life. Don't you have two categories? Actually three, because there's a neutral category, right? There are people that you like. There are people that you dislike. And there are many people that you don't have any particular strong feelings towards. An enlightened person is freed from that categorization, divisiveness, putting people in categories, free from that completely. And so therefore no one is considered your enemy. No one is considered like you're special. In fact, everyone is special. And we're going to see that as we go forward now. Everyone is an embodiment of that divinity. And what we're going to see in this final line is really surprising. An embodiment of the divinity. Sri Krishna identifies himself with that divinity. Look at this next line. If you're following this text, this line should be kind of surprising. It should be, not shocking is too big a word, but there's something unusual. Something's going on here where Sri Krishna has been talking about getting prepared for enlightenment and discovering, realizing that your true nature is Brahman. And then having discussed all that in some detail in the last series of verses, then he shifts gears, to use the American English expression, and he says, that person, labhate, that enlightened person, labhate, gains mad bhaktim, devotion unto me, param, the highest form of devotion unto me. This almost sounds like it's out of place. We've been talking about gaining spiritual wisdom, gaining spiritual knowledge, self-realization, to use the common term. How did he suddenly switch over to bhakti? Huh? What's going on? And it is. I'm trying to exaggerate to make a point. I'm hoping you will appreciate that there's something unusual going on at the end of this verse. Sri Krishna has suddenly shifted the topic from spiritual realization to bhakti. What's going on? And I'm hoping you think it looks a little weird. And here's I mentioned before commentary. The idea is when something looks a little weird, you consult a commentary. By the way, this big book is Bhagavad Gita with commentaries. How many commentaries? 7. 7, by the way, I haven't studied them all. I studied about 3 of them. That's enough. And as I've said several times before, to make this Bhagavad Gita session different than prior ones, usually we follow the commentary of Sri Shankaracharya. Here we're following the commentary of Madhusudana Saraswati, a later teacher in Shankara's lineage, and it's a brilliant commentary, and it's not studied as much perhaps as it should be. And what he says here with regard to this unusual verse is so important and powerful and clear that I'd like to share it with you word for word. I don't usually do this, but in this case, I think it's worth the effort. So he explains that last line, Mad Bhaktim Param, to gain this param, this ultimate, the supreme bhakti, devotion, unto, that mud is a pronoun, me, that supreme devotion unto me. Madhusudana Saraswati explains it like this. Mad Bhaktim means what? Mayi Bhagavati Shuddhe Paramatmani Bhaktim. He says it is devotion unto me who is the Shuddhe Paramatmani, pure Paramatma. Paramatma is a word we use for that inner divinity. Sri Krishna says, and he's said this many times in prior verses, those of you who have been attending these classes have heard Sri Krishna say on several occasions, Sri Krishna says, I am the inner divinity that dwells within all. That's one of the unique characteristics of the Bhagavad Gita, where Sri Krishna, as an avatara, as an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, and not only as an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, but he's also enlightened. We don't generally think of him being enlightened because we can't imagine an incarnation of God not being enlightened, of course, and that's absolutely correct. But let's understand that Sri Krishna knows not only that he is the son of Vasudeva, Sri Krishna also knows that he is an incarnation, an avatara of Lord Vishnu, and Sri Krishna also knows that he is that Brahman that dwells within all as their essence. This is what I mean by Sri Krishna is enlightened. So here, Sri Krishna also has an ego, right? That functional self-identity. Sri Krishna can say, I am the son of Vasudeva. Sri Krishna can say, I am an avatar of Lord Vishnu. Sri Krishna can also say, I am Brahman. And that's what Madhusudana explains here, where mad bhaktim, devotion unto me, not devotion unto, there's an point, not devotion unto the son of Vasudeva, not even devotion unto the avatara of Lord Vishnu. On our altar is Sri Krishna as avatara of Lord Vishnu and son of Vasudeva. Both are true. What we can't depict on our altar is Sri Krishna as Brahman. If we want to put Sri Krishna as Brahman, the altar would be empty because, of course, Brahman is formless. So we need a form for the sake of our worship, but here we're talking about a formless reality, the divinity that dwells within you, And Madhusudana says, when Sri Krishna says devotion unto me, he means devotion unto me, not as son of Vasudeva, not as Avatara, devotion unto me as Brahman. And he uses Shuddhe Paramatmani, into that pure Paramatma, inner divinity, which is the truth of every person. He continues that bhaktim. And that bhakti, which is upasanam. Upasana is another name for meditation. Etymologically, upasana means to come close. How close? To become identified. The idea is you meditate on the sun through a form of upasana. You become the sun. You become identified. You merge into the sun. The word upasana refers to a form of meditation in which you become one with what you meditate on. You meditate on Brahman, you become one with Brahman. You meditate on the sun, you become one with the sun. You meditate on some deity, you become one. That's what the word upasana means. And here then he defines further. We're talking about mad bhaktim. That bhakti is upasana. What kind of upasana? Madakara chitta vritti avritti rupam. A meditation which is a constant, and I can't say reflection, a constant immersion of your mind, directing your mind towards the object of meditation. What that means in this context, to meditate on Lord Krishna, to actually, here, the bhakti, that's an interesting little switch that Madhusudana did very cleverly. He translated bhakti as upasana. Upasana is a form of meditation. He's erasing the boundary between bhakti and meditation. One of the problems you've heard me talk about before is a big problem in spiritual life is to put spiritual practices into nice, neat little boxes. And that's not how it works. So there's jnana yoga, there's bhakti yoga, there's karma yoga, there's dhyana yoga, meditation. Each practice in a little box. To use American English, there ain't no boxes. There are different aspects of a life of spiritual growth. So we recognize that there are some different emphases of these different spiritual practices, but when we become overly rigid about defining what is this, what is that, it doesn't work. There is so much carryover. In the next couple of verses, we're going to see Sri Krishna blurring the barrier between bhakti yoga and karma yoga. Right now, Madhusudana is blurring the boundary between bhakti and dhyana, intentionally blurring the boundary. This is actually not a little important, it's very important. What it means is that your bhakti should be infused with meditation, and your meditation should be infused with bhakti. What a nice perspective here. So this upasana is in the form, that long thing I just repeated, means a kind of meditation in which you absorb your attention, you absorb your mind, you absorb your thoughts in Sri Krishna, again, not as son of Vasudeva, not as Avatara, you absorb your mind in Sri Krishna as the inner divinity dwelling within you, as your true nature, as Brahman. To absorb your mind in Sri Krishna as Brahman, paripakva nididhyasana akhyam. And he says this is nididhyasana. This is what we call nididhyasana. Nididhyasana is Vedantic contemplation. We won't talk about it more here. If you want to learn more about nididhyasana, come for that Vedanta class. And this practice is Shravana, Manana, Abhyasa, Phala Bhutam. It is the result of what we're doing now, which is Shravana and Manana. The result of using these spiritual teachings to guide you on a process of spiritual growth that culminates in discovery of your true nature as Brahman. You can only meditate on what you've discovered, right? That's kind of the point here. You can only meditate on, my guru used to make a joke out of this. He would ask us, can you meditate, and in all serious, and he can look very serious with that big, you call it dadi, that big big white beard, and he's covered, and then in all seriousness he says, can you meditate on Gagabugai? What is Gagabugai? Meaningless word he made up to illustrate the fact that you can't meditate on what you don't know. So the meditation that in that word mad bhaktim, it's devotion kind of merged with meditation, and a meditation, again, not on son of, by the way, did you ever meet the son of Vasudeva? Okay. Or the avatar of Lord Vishnu. We haven't personally met. If we lived thousands of years ago, perhaps, but today we haven't met. Here, this is the personal discovery, personal realization of what is already present within you. A realization in the present moment, which can only be of that which you know. So you can only meditate on what you know, what is immediately present in your experience. And he concludes, labhate param. That person gains the supreme. That word param he explains as shreshtam, the highest, the absolute, avyavadhanena sakshatkara palam. Sakshatkara is a very powerful Sanskrit term used to indicate direct realization, sakshatkara, the immediate and direct realization of, figuratively, Sri Krishna's presence within you. And to have that realization, he says, avyavadhanena, without any interference. It's not like you're looking through a veil of ignorance or anything interfering with your realization. An unobstructed, direct realization. So this was so wonderful. I just wanted to share it with you. Normally we don't do this, but it really explains vividly what's going on here at the end of the verse, and that is when you gain enlightenment, you discover that your true nature is Brahman. But with that realization, you simultaneously understand that that Brahman is not just a truth of you, it's a truth of everyone and everything. The same Brahman that is the essence of you is the same Brahman that is the essence of the universe and the essence even of Ishvara. So here, he makes this transition to bhakti. And a final comment to make the connection to the next verse. There are different kinds of bhakti, obviously. There's Krishna bhakti, Rama bhakti. We have devotion unto individual deities. But there are other more technical terms to describe bhakti. For example, a common division, if you've studied this Narada Bhakti Sutra, right at the beginning, it's one of the famous texts on bhakti. Right at the beginning, Narada makes a distinction between para bhakti and apara bhakti. From my hand position, you can get the sense. Para bhakti is a higher bhakti, and apara bhakti is a lower bhakti. And to explain it in keeping with our current context, Para bhakti is devotion unto Sri Krishna's presence within you as Brahman, as your essential nature, as that inner divinity. That is para bhakti. Here the word comes, param. What is the apara bhakti? As we've said before, para bhakti is devotion to the son of Vasudeva, to the avatara of Lord Vishnu, which means Ishvara in a particular form. So the formless is higher for many reasons. That which has form is considered lower. And that's not, by the way, that's not a criticism at all, because, and the reason it is absolutely a mistake. Oh, that's only apara bhakti. Some people are critical. Some people who fancy themselves great Vedantins are highly critical of those who stand in front of an altar and pray. Oh, they don't know anything. I'm kind of exaggerating to make a point. But they are highly critical, and they're missing the point. So they say this is apara bhakti. They should practice para bhakti. Now, first question is, the person who's passing these negative comments, do you think they have para bhakti? Do you think they're enlightened? Unlikely, right? So it is an unenlightened person passing judgment on those who succumb to this lower form of devotion called apara bhakti. Clueless. How do you gain para bhakti? By means of apara bhakti. They're stepping stones. So to be critical of this, to be critical of worship involving forms, in my opinion, is absolutely misdirected criticism. The only way your mind can reach the formless reality is through forms. We begin with forms and then continue. This whole teaching is based on steps. One step after another step after another step. You can't leap. The metaphor is if you come to a stream that's 20 feet across, try to get across in one leap. You'll end up wet. But if there's a series of step stones across the stream, no problem. That's how these teachings work. That's how the teachings of Vedanta work, by leading you step to step to step to step. And apara bhakti, worship of forms, is a crucial step. If you try to skip that step, I'll mix metaphors. If you skip that step, you'll get wet. How's that for a mixed metaphor? Okay, let's continue. Bhaktya mam abhijanati, bhaktya mam abhijanati, yavan yaschasmi tattvataha, yavan yaschasmi tattvataha, tato mam tattvato jnatva, tato mam tattvato jnatva, vishate taranantaram, vishate taranantaram. Here's the steps. Bhaktya, through devotion, and we're talking about devotion unto the son of Vasudeva, the avatara of Lord Vishnu, through that apara bhakti, mam abhijanati, one comes to know me, mam, me. Me, not as son of Vasudeva, avatara Lord Vishnu, one comes to know me, yavancha asmi, as I truly am. One comes to know Sri Krishna as he knows himself. Sri Krishna knows, I am Brahman. To know Krishna truly is not to know that Sri Krishna is Brahman. To know Krishna truly is to know I am the same reality that Krishna is. There is one reality called Brahman. I am that reality. So in this way, one knows Mam Abhijanati. Through bhakti, through those stepping stones, one comes to know Mam Shri Krishna, one comes to know me, Tattvataha, in reality, Yavancha Asmi, as I truly am. Tataha, thereafter, Mam Tattvataha Jnatva, having known me, Mam Jnatva, having known me, Tattvataha, as I truly am, having known me as I truly am, which means as Brahman, not just as Avatada and son of Vasudeva, then Vishate, one enters tadanantaram. Immediately, one immediately enters me. Do you think this is more figurative language? What does it mean to enter? How can you merge with that from which you're already non-separate? Many people will use that word merging, and there's nothing wrong because it suggests the word merging suggests a kind of experience you have in meditation. Here the word vishate literally means to enter, but to enter kind of has a sense of to merge. And let me explain this. In meditation, it's not uncommon to have the feeling of merging. Merging into what? It's tricky. If I've been meditating for such a long time, I not only meditate a lot, I think about the meditations. In fact, I'm starting to work on a new video series on meditation at a very deep level, because in meditation you can have so many different experiences, but if you don't understand what those experiences are, you're missing something, because experiences can be misunderstood. Experiences can be misinterpreted. How many times have you heard me talk about the sunset? You experienced the sunset. No, you have never experienced the sun going down. The earth turns. So this is an example of a misinterpretation of experience. In the same way, the experience of merging in meditation, it's a common experience that gets misinterpreted. Because merging means A merges into B. There's duality. We call this Advaita Vedanta for a reason. There's no duality. Then how do we explain the experience? It's absolutely an experience of merging. But there are two ways of interpreting. Just as you can interpret the sunset as the sun is going down or the earth is turning, but one interpretation is right and one interpretation is wrong. In the same way, we can explain the experience in meditation of merging in two ways. One is right and one is wrong. A merging into B is wrong. What is right is, I'm not sure if this is going to make sense, let me try. I don't think I've taught this before. In meditation, you lose your boundaries. Your boundaries disappear. Those boundaries, by the way, are the result of that ahankara we talked about before. In deep meditation, this is one kind of samadhi in which the ahankara undergoes dissolution, resolution. And with the loss of ahankara, you no longer feel a sense of being Thank you. Yeah, in meditation, you no longer feel a sense of being stuck inside this body. The sense of being embodied, the sense of having an edge or limit goes away. when that sense of being stuck inside a body goes away, you experience it as merging. But in fact, you're not merging. A is not merging into B. A boundary is fading away. So here when he says vishate, one enters into me, one merges into me, this is a better way of understanding it. Madhusudana understands it differently. We'll end with this. There are different, and maybe you should understand this. This is a good example of how Shankaracharya interprets it in one way. Madhusudana Saraswati interprets it in another way. But here, both interpretations are right. What makes them right is they're fully consistent with the entire teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, the entire teachings of Vedanta, so there's no one right interpretation. And it has to do with Sanskrit. Tadanantaram can mean immediately. Tadanantaram can also mean after that. After that means what? Madhusudana interprets it as after death, after the loss of the body. I just described a kind of merging in meditation when your body goes away from your experience. You no longer experience your body. When you no longer experience your body, that sense of being stuck inside a body goes away. That's what we said before, that experience of merging. Madhusudana explains it a little differently, not in a figurative sense of losing your body in meditation, but in a literal sense of losing your body at death. And from that standpoint, he says that when you're enlightened and you lose your body at death, tadanantaram, then what happens? Vishate mam. One enters me, and it's a figurative entering. And here's the classic example that's given in so many Vedanta texts. We'll end our class with this metaphor. There is space inside this pot. There is space outside this pot. Figuratively speaking, when the pot breaks, pot space merges into universal space. Notice I said metaphorically, because even when the pot exists, pot space is non-separate from universal space. But this suggests that from an experiential standpoint, that's the key point, from an experiential standpoint, when this pot ceases to exist, pot space experientially merges into space, just as in meditation, when you no longer experience your pot. Is that why they call it pot belly? Anyway, sorry about that, kind of a bad joke. But in a sense, pot is a container, and your body is a container. There is space inside this pot, there is consciousness inside this body. When this pot goes away, pot space metaphorically merges into universal space. When this body goes away in meditation, that is, when you cease to be aware of your body in meditation, then experientially, the consciousness which previously seemed stuck inside your body, that consciousness now experientially feels vast, boundaryless, limitless. You can experience this if you are a serious meditator. You can do that, I promise you. And finally, if you are enlightened and your pot cracks, your body dies, it's the same. The consciousness which had previously been inside this body merges figuratively, metaphorically merges, experientially merges. In fact, that's a nice way of putting it. What is the experience of an enlightened person at death? What a way to end our class. What is the experience of an enlightened person at the moment of death? Absolutely. No longer confined by the limitations of this body and mind. They call it videha mukti, a freedom, not just freedom in the absence of the body, freedom from the body. Because the body is limited, the body is always a source of problems, so now the enlightened person becomes freed from all those limitations and problems. Okay, nice way to end our class. A brief announcement. Tomorrow we have a summer schedule. As I mentioned, the Vedanta class is in hiatus, and we have shifted our satsang to 6 p.m. so we can meet outside in the picnic area. It's delightful. Come and join us tomorrow at 6 o'clock. If the weather is nice, we'll sit out there. Otherwise, we come in here. It's very pleasant out there. I love that. We'll conclude today with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatahana Shrinvan Utbhisira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gurudhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.